Good morning. Welcome to another Daily Devotions with Pastor Joe. I'm Pastor Joe, and this Sunday I heard a message out of Jeremiah chapter 6, and verse 16 really spoke to me. It says here, "Thus saith the Lord, stand ye in the ways, and see, and ask for the old paths. Where is the good way? And walk therein, and ye shall find rest for your souls." But they said, speaking of the Israelites, "We will not walk therein." And realize first that this is definitely a verse that was speaking to Israel at the time. Jeremiah, being the weeping prophet, had a lot of sad things to preach to the people about. He had a lot of sad things to talk to them about. He talked to them about destruction. He talked to them about their sin that they had committed. He talked to them about being lost and how they were all doomed, basically. But he also gave them a lot of opportunities for hope, at least the hope that God wanted to offer to them, which was that if you come back to me, I'll take you out of this captivity and I'll bring you back to your homeland. But even though it's speaking to them in their day about their situation, I believe it also speaks to us in our day about whatever situation we happen to have going on. So, speaking to Israel at the time, speaking to us today, it says here that the Lord said, "Stand ye in the ways." And I thought a little bit about that, and I thought, well, what could it possibly mean for us today? And what I came up with was this: position yourself in the right ways, in the right ways of living. So put yourself in a position where you're living the way you ought to live. Stand in the ways, put yourself in the way, position yourself in such a way that you're living right. So is the life that you're living right now, is it right with God, or is it not right with God? Are you standing in the way of God, or are you standing in the way of the world? And that's a question that we have to ask ourselves. And if we want God to bless us, if we want God to be in control and in charge of our lives, if we want to live for God, or even to be able to claim that we live for God, then the first thing we ought to ask ourselves is, are we standing in God's ways? Are we positioned in our lives in the way of God? If we're not positioned in the way of God, then what do we need to do about it to fix that? And the second thing he says then is, and see. And I thought, wow, and see. What's different there? What is it saying there? And see. And he says, I came up with this: there is a real difference between the old ways and the modern worldly ways. So he's saying, stand in the ways of God, position your life in the ways of God, and see that the ways of God are very different than the ways of the world and the ways of man. See that there is a difference, and that difference is vital and important to the well-being of you and everyone else in the world. That if you don't live the way that God is asking you to live, then you'll be in a pretty sour spot, a pretty poor position, because that's not the same as God's way. The world's way is not the same as God's way. See that there is a difference. And then it says, ask for the old paths. The old paths that the old-timers used to take to get to God. The old ways that the people before us lived with God. Ask means to desire, to seek, to deeply want the ways. To seek the way that is proven good and true. So, if you've taken the time to make sure that you're positioned in God's way, you see that there really is a difference in the ultimate results, and in whether one way is better than the other, and whether one way is good and the other is not, which it is. There's one way that is good and one way that is not, and all the ways that are not good are the ways of sin. But if you take the time to do that, then you take the time to ask for the old paths, to find the good way, to find the way that you ought to walk and live. He says, walk therein, and you shall find rest for your souls. So if you feel a little weary, you feel a little torn, you feel a little tired, you feel like something's lacking inside, like there's a gap where something ought to be inside, then take the advice of Jeremiah and the advice of the Lord. Seek the old ways. Seek the ways that have been tried, tested, proven true time and again. Let God make a difference in your life. You will find rest for your souls. So, thus saith the Lord. Make sure you're standing in the way of God. See that God's way is a much better way to take. Ask, seek, deeply desire the old ways, the good ways that were proven true time and again. Walk in those ways. Don't just look at them. Walk in them, and you will find rest for your soul. But the sad thing is the Israelites that day said, we will not walk therein. Yeah, we're not going to do it. So what if God wants us to? So what if it's going to mean rest for our souls? We like what we've got, and we're not willing to give up our rights. We're not willing to give up our freedoms. And yet they were slaves, bound. And yet people today are slaves, sin-sick and bound. Walk in the way of God this morning. Take His paths. Take His ways. Live for God today. I encourage you to take the time to make sure you take a checkup from the neck up and the heart too, to see how God has worked in your life and see whether there's anything lacking, anything you need taken care of, because the divine physician's on call, ready to make a change in your life today. God bless and have an awesome day in the Lord.